Barakata Yahweh, Barakata Yahawashi, Bahasham, Barakah Gudash, Barakatum. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, glory, and infinite honors to Yahweh, Bahasham, Yahawashi. Double honors to the apostles and elders at Great Millstone who rule and teach well. And peace and salutations to you sincere Akim out there, pushing this word in truth and sincerity to the four corners of the globe. May you brothers endure until the end. This is the brother Ra'aya with another video, and I'm going to start it off in Matthew chapter 24, verse 3. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, that he being Yahawashi Hamashayak, whom the world ignorantly refers to as so-called Jesus Christ, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming, the second coming of Yahawashi Hamashayak, and the end of the world, or the age of the rulership of the heathen nations? Now I'm going to jump down to verse 7. Well, actually verse 6. And ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. And of course, we have the war going on in Ukraine, rumors of war between China and Taiwan, rumors of war between the U.S. and NATO against Russia, rumors of war between Israel and Iran, etc., etc. And World War III is yet to happen. Verse 7, for nation shall rise against nation, race wars which are coming, and you can especially see these tensions building up in the United States of America, and kingdom against kingdom, big power players, the U.S. against Russia, China against the U.S., Israel against Iran, and there shall be famines, which you're hearing a lot about in the news now, with diesel fuel shortages coming, as well as diesel engine oil shortages, which if diesel trucks aren't able to get fuel, they won't be able to deliver food to these stores or even deliver regular gasoline to these gas stations for cars. You've got farmers saying that due to high fuel prices as well as adverse weather events, they won't be able to plant the sufficient amount of crops that they want to plant. And then you've got the war in Ukraine causing wheat shortages and fertilizer shortages. Hey, food shortages and biblical famines are coming. And pestilences, these diseases out here, which it seems now every day something new is popping up. And earthquakes in diverse places. And earthquakes are happening daily all across the planet. Verse 8. All these are the beginning of sorrows, and these are all the end time signs that Yahawashi Hamashayak told his disciples to look for, to know that his second coming was nigh. As it said back in verse 3, what shall be the sign of thy coming? And the end of the world, the end of the age of the rulership of the heathen nations, which were living in the last bit of the heathens ruling. And the top heathen nation that's ruling right now are the biblical Edomites, who are known as the so-called white people. And while Yahawashi was speaking to his disciples in the past, as it says in Romans chapter 15, everything written aforetime was written for our learning. We're living in the times of the end, the last days, really the last seconds of the last days before Yahawashi's second coming, the end of this rulership of the heathen nations, and the ushering in of the kingdom of heaven under the true children of Israel, who are known as the so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans today, in the kingdom of heaven will last for eternity. And in verses 6 and 7, I gave some examples, some real-world examples, to show you that these end-time signs are either in the process of taking place or taking place as we speak. But in this video, I'll be specifically dealing with the pestilences. I have one article from endoftheamericandream.com as well as the economiccollapseblog.org showing that pestilences are popping up damn near daily all across the planet, and some that are already in effect right now, such as the Kragamuffin 1.9. You have the Omarion BA.5, which is gaining traction now. And then you've got, of course, the monkeypox, which infection rates are continuing to climb. And now, as we'll see on the article from the economiccollapseblog.com, you've got an outbreak of Marburg virus has begun. There shall be pestilences. And a few brothers have already done videos talking about this Marburg virus and how you have some people out there speculating that this could be the next big thing that brings in a new wave of lockdowns and draconian measures, which we'll have to wait and see if that's the case. And Abaratazah, that is the case. But just know, as it said back in Matthew chapter 24, verse 8, all these are the beginning of sorrows. We're just in the beginning stages of these pestilences, famines, race wars, civil wars, world wars, martial law, you name it. The Most High is about to judge you people on this planet for all the wickedness you've been committing. Mass death and destruction is right around the corner. So like we always tell you, sincere Akim and Aquath out there, right now during this time of grace, you should be doing everything you can to stay in the good graces of your power, Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai, so you can hope to be of that elect number and have that protective hedge over you to be saved from these coming calamities of Jacob's trouble, which are quickly coming upon us. Well, let's get into this first article. Why are so many unusual outbreaks of disease suddenly happening all over the planet? Because we're living in the last days. We were already dealing with a seemingly endless global situation coming into 2022, which Apostle Tahar is deemed to be the year of Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai, turning things up. And we can see that since this year's kicked off, things have turned up exponentially. And so far this year, a bird flu situation has resulted in the deaths of tens of millions of our chickens and turkeys, the worst, and for the rest of the video, I'll be referring to it as the Curious George outbreak in history, has spread like wildfire in the Western world, and now it is being reported that there is an outbreak of the Marburg virus in Africa. And for the rest of the video, I'll be referring to the Marburg as the Mossberg, as the elder brother Malcolm of the Chicago campus called it. We have already lost our opportunity to contain the Curious George, and that is really bad news. But if authorities are not able to successfully contain this new Mossberg outbreak, we could potentially be facing a scenario that is downright apocalyptic. The new outbreak of the Mossberg virus is happening in Ghana. The two victims that have died so far did not know each other, and officials believe that this is evidence that the disease is spreading more widely. 2 people are believed to have died from the extremely deadly Mossberg virus in Ghana as officials gear up for a potential outbreak. The patients from the country's southern Ashanti region were not known to each other, suggesting the situation is spreading more widely. Initial tests came back positive for the situation, and the samples are being reanalyzed by the World Health Organization. Global health authorities have always warned that the Mossberg virus is a good candidate for a horrifying global situation because it can have a very long incubation period. The following information comes from the World Health Organization. The incubation period, interval from infection to onset of symptoms, varies from 2 to 21 days. Illness caused by the Mossberg virus begins abruptly with high fever, severe headache, and severe malaise. Muscle aches and pains are a common feature. Severe watery diarrhea, abdominal pain, and cramping, nausea, and vomiting can begin on the 3rd day. Diarrhea can persist for a week. The appearance of patients at this phase has been described as showing ghost-like, drawn features, deep-set eyes, expressionless faces, and extreme lethargy. All of that sounds terrible, but the next stage of the situation is truly nightmarish. Many patients develop severe hemorrhagic manifestations between 5 and 7 days, and fatal cases usually have some form of bleeding, often from multiple areas. Fresh blood in vomitus and feces is often accompanied by bleeding from the nose, gums, and vagina. Spontaneous bleeding of venipuncture sites, where intravenous access is obtained to give fluids or obtain blood samples, can be particularly troublesome. During the severe phase of illness, patients have sustained high fevers. Involvement of the central nervous system can result in confusion, irritability, and aggression. Orchitis, Inflammation of one or both testicles has been reported occasionally in the late phase of the disease, 15 days. In fatal cases, death occurs most often between 8 and 9 days after symptom onset, usually preceded by severe blood loss and shock. The largest previous outbreak of the disease was in 2005. During that outbreak, 88% of the victims died. The largest outbreak to date was in Angola in 2005, when 374 caught the virus and 329 died, a fatality rate of 88%. And remember, before the Curious George started spreading in Western Europe as well as in America, it was believed that the Curious George was localized to Africa. But hey, again, it's in Western Europe as well as the Americas. And now they're talking about an outbreak of the Mossberg in Africa. And it's saying the last outbreak was in Angola, also in Africa, back in 2005. Hey, is Marburg going to do like the Curious George, start spreading to Western Europe, the United States, and other places all across the planet? A disease that has a death rate of way less than 1% ended up paralyzing much of the planet for months on end, speaking of the Cragamuffin 19. So what do you think will happen if the Mossberg virus becomes a true global situation? Needless to say, the panic would be off the charts, and there is no cure and no jump shot. The Mossberg virus is a top concern for public health officials who are worried about the next situation. It has the potential to cause serious public health emergencies, but there are currently no jump shots or antiviral treatments approved to treat the situation. Meanwhile, the number of Curious George cases continue to rise at an exponential rate. When I wrote about Curious George yesterday, there were 7,534 global cases. Unfortunately, Friday was the worst day for this outbreak so far by a very wide margin, and now there are 9,109 global cases. I had been hoping that this outbreak would fade after the initial spike of cases, but instead it seems to be rapidly picking up momentum. Here in the United States, it has already spread to 39 different states, and the total number of cases has now risen to 790. If the number of cases continue to double at a very fast pace, it won't be too long before we have a major national crisis on our hands. And Albaratazad, that's the case. And real quick, a little side note, you had a former executive at the firm BlackRock say that he could see going into the midterms, the powers that be hyping up the Curious George and saying, look, it's become a major situation out here. We need to instate some new lockdowns to not only disrupt the midterm elections in the US, which at the end of the day really don't matter because votes are pointless, but also cover up this major economic collapse that's not just coming to the United States of America, but globally. Now you're starting to have a lot of mainstream media outlets talk about how these major nations are going to go into severe recessions. Let us hope that that doesn't happen, because this is a disease that you definitely do not want to get. And with that, we'll segue into my second article on endoftheamericandream.com titled, "This version of Curious George is an excruciatingly painful disease, and it continues to spread at an exponential rate." Do we have another major global situation on our hands? When I wrote my first article about Curious George in early May, there were 3 total cases. Today, there are 7,534, and the total number of cases continue to rise at an exponential rate. I had been hoping that this outbreak would quickly fade after an initial spike, but that hasn't happened. Instead, the number of cases has just kept doubling time after time. And if we stay on this trajectory, we're going to have a historic nightmare on our hands by the end of the year. Hopefully that will not be the case, but what we are witnessing right now is extremely alarming. These are just the beginning of sorrows. The number of cases here in the United States also continued to climb at an exponential rate, and the CDC is telling us that the grand total has now risen to 605. Curious George cases continue to rise in the U.S., with new infections detected. Data from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention shows. The latest update by the CDC on Friday brings the nation's total cases to 605, only 2 months since the first U.S. case was detected. New York City has emerged as one of the key hotspots for the disease in this country. According to officials, the total number of cases in NYC has doubled over the last week. New Curious George infections in New York City are up 28% since last Friday, city health officials said Tuesday, as the clock ticks on more jump shot doses to confront the outbreak. There are now 111 cases, the City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene tweeted, versus 87 last Friday. Cases have now fully doubled in the last week. If you want to get an idea of where this could be headed, just do the math. 111 cases could soon become 222 cases, and 222 cases could quickly become 444 cases, etc., etc. Curious George is already in 36 different U.S. states, and pretty soon it will be literally everywhere. And this is one disease that you definitely do not want to get. NBC News recently interviewed numerous victims, and one of the common themes among the interviews was excruciating pain. Here's one example. New Yorker Gerald Feebles, 25, said Curious George saddled him with harrowing pain all over his body, including lesions in his mouth and on his gums. His lymph nodes in his groin swelled to the size of fists, making it agonizing to do anything but lie down, he said. The pain becomes so unbearable, Feebles said as he waited for hours at Lenox Hill Hospital in Manhattan last week. Every joint in my body hurts. Another victim was experiencing extreme pain all over his body, and he was unable to eat for days due to huge sores in his mouth. Heron Tulane, 35, also spoke last week from the hospital in his case in London. He had been unable to eat for days due to lesions in his mouth and swelling in the lymph nodes in his neck that was so intense he couldn't swallow. His left nostril was covered in a purple-black lesion. Like Feebles, he said he was experiencing extreme pain all over his body, which physicians were treating with opioids while also giving him tecovirimet. I honestly didn't realize that this disease was so horrifying. One man that apparently caught Curious George while filming quote-unquote sex scenes says that he experienced the worst pain in his life. I now know what it felt like to be the first HIV patients many decades ago, said Alex, 32, a biologist in Washington, D.C., who said he believes he got Curious George from a gathering of a few dozen OnlyFans creators where they were filming sex scenes with one another. Hey, and good for this guy. Hey, the Most High is about to start really jacking up you promiscuous and adulterous people out here, and you sexually lascivious deviants, including those of the alphabet group beginning with LG, which the Curious George has mainly been affecting. He said he's heard the event likely led to at least 3 other cases. Alex said when he went to a DC hospital with the worst pain of my life, that the doctors had no idea what to do. They were on Google, literally. So what is this country going to look like if millions of people eventually develop excruciating pain after catching Curious George? Hey, we can see more lockdowns, medical martial law, more draconian measures to take away the people's rights, people getting sent off to so-called quarantine zones for decontamination, etc., etc. And it could be from the Curious George, the Mossberg, or any of these other many pestilences that Yahweh Bahasham Yahweh Shai is going to begin bringing on you people to judge you for the wickedness you've been committing. Let me see. I'll read this last little bit right here. Scientists are telling us that this is a hypermutated version of the disease, which has around 50 genetic variations compared to earlier strains. In the latest study, Researchers discovered around 50 genetic variations in the viruses they studied compared to ones from 2018 and 2019. This, they said, is far more than one would expect considering previous estimates of the mutation rate of orthopox viruses, of which Curious George is a type, between 6 and 12 times more. So apparently this is a hypermutated version of the Curious George. So that's it with this article. Now let's get back into these precepts. This is 2nd Esdras in the Apocrypha, chapter 16. I'm going to start at verse 14. Behold, the plagues are sent, and shall not return again until they come upon the earth. These plagues can include these pestilences like Cragamuffin, Mossberg, and Curious George, as well as these other plagues or judgments of Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai. Famines, martial law, race wars, civil war, nuclear war, etc., etc. The fire is kindled and shall not be put out till it consume the foundation of the earth. And these different plagues are different fires that are going to burn up you people in judgment. But that ultimate fire of judgment that's coming are those nuclear-tipped ICBMs, which are going to be shot to the ends of the earth at some point during World War III, which is going to happen after the mandatory implementation of the charagma, the MARKOFTHEBEAST in Revelation chapter 13, verses 16 to 18, which of course is the RFID/NFC MICROCHIPIMPLANT. Like as an arrow which is shot of a mighty archer returneth not backward, even so the plagues that shall be sent upon the earth shall not return again. Hey, once they get sent out, that's it. And they're only going to continue to get worse. And remember, as it said again back in Matthew 24, verse 8, we're only in the beginning of sorrows right now. Woe is me, woe is me. Who will deliver me in those days? Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai, if you're an Israelite of that elect number. The beginning of sorrows and great mournings, the beginning of famine and great death, the beginning of wars, and the powers shall stand in fear, the beginning of evils, and what shall I do when these evils shall come? Behold, famine and plague, pestilences, tribulation and anguish are sent as scourges for amendment, scourges for correction, scourges for judgment, scourges for punishment from Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai on you wicked people for all the iniquity you've been committing on this planet. Mainly you Edomites or so-called white people who do everything clean contrary to the laws, statutes, and commandments of Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai, and have turned most of this planet into an upside-down trash can. And the wicked of our people, 2/3 of you so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans in the United States, and the wicked of our people globally who are hard-headed and refuse to return under our power, Yahweh Bahashem Yahweh Shai. The Most High is about to jack you up in ways you could have only imagined. So that's it with this video. And with this video, I hope you sincere Akim and Akwath were edified. Just keep strong. We're almost out of this final wicked captivity of the heathen nations, chiefly of the Edomites. And as always, I'm going to say Abad Babal, Kwam Yasharala, and until next time, Shalom.